All right, welcome in everyone. It's time for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something that, let's be honest, might not sound like the most thrilling topic at first glance: workplace policies. But trust me, this stuff is way more important than you might think, especially when we zero in on the world of IT and the whole cybersecurity landscape. And to help us really unpack this, we're tapping into the expertise of Ricardo Van Ramen.
That's right.
He's the CEO and founder of Information Systems Engineers. They go by ISEngineers, and they're all about making sure the things that matter most are safe and sound.
Yeah, when Ricardo talks about safety, he's not just talking about hard hats and safety goggles. He's talking about keeping people safe, sure, but also physical assets. And then that big one, information.
Right, because it's all connected. You've got your physical security measures, surveillance systems, access control, all that stuff.
Exactly. Then you've got the whole digital side, right? Making sure that data is secure, that it's accurate, and that people can get to it when they need it. That's where data security and cybersecurity come in.
So what we're going to do today is really dig into why having solid workplace policies in place isn't just some boring bureaucratic box to pick. It's actually a major foundation for a workplace that's productive, fair, and crucially, secure.
Absolutely.
And we're going to particularly zoom in on why having strong cybersecurity policies is like non-negotiable for any IT department these days.
Oh, yeah.
Just can't mess around with that.
Nope, not in this day and age.
So let's start with the basics. Why bother with general workplace policies in the first place? What's the big deal?
Okay, so workplace policies, right? They actually do a bunch of really important things. First off, they set the stage. They lay out what's expected in terms of how people should act, how they should perform, and the values that the organization really cares about.
It's like, here's how we do things around here.
Exactly. It's all about making sure everyone's on the same page, reducing any confusion about what's cool and what's not cool. But just like having a super detailed map doesn't help if you don't actually use it to navigate.
Right. What good is a map if you're just going to wander around aimlessly?
Exactly. So these policies, they're only as good as their enforcement.
Yeah.
You can't just write them down and forget about them. If you don't enforce them consistently, well, they just become words on paper, right? And then you end up with inconsistencies, people doing their own thing, and potentially a really messy situation.
And that brings up the idea of fairness, which I know is a big one.
Huge. When you have policies in place and they're enforced fairly across the board, what you're doing is making sure everyone is treated the same, no matter what their position is or how long they've been with the company.
It levels the playing field.
Exactly. And that builds trust, respect, a good vibe overall. But think about the flip side. If you've got these policies and they're only kind of sort of enforced, or if it looks like some people or teams are getting away with stuff that others aren't.
Oh, that's going to breed some resentment fast.
For sure. You start creating a toxic environment where people feel like the rules don't apply equally. So consistent enforcement is all about making sure everyone knows the rules of the game and that those rules are applied fairly to everyone.
And then there's the whole legal side of things, which can get pretty serious.
Oh yeah, that's a whole other layer.
Yeah.
See, a lot of these policies aren't just like best practices or suggestions. They're actually rooted in the law.
So it's not just about what's good for the company internally, it's about staying on the right side of the law.
You got it. Things like discrimination, harassment, safety in the workplace, labor standards, there are laws about this stuff. And a lot of times those laws actually require companies to have specific policies in place.
So you're protecting yourself from legal headaches.
Big time. By having these policies, and this is crucial, making sure they're actually enforced, organizations can avoid getting into hot water legally, and they can also show that they're serious about operating within the law.
Makes sense. You don't want to be caught out without that protection. And then, of course, there's the whole safety and well-being angle.
Which is massive. Policies around safety, health, and just general well-being, they're all about protecting employees from harm, both physically and mentally, and creating an environment where people feel safe and supported.
It's about more than just avoiding lawsuits. It's about genuinely caring for your people.
For sure. Think about safety protocols for operating machinery or policies that specifically prohibit things like harassment or bullying. If you're not enforcing these consistently, you're basically asking for trouble.
Accidents waiting to happen.
Exactly. You get preventable accidents, injuries, people getting burned out or stressed. It all affects productivity in the end. So it's about building a culture of care, not just ticking boxes.
Okay, so we've talked about the benefits for employees, but what about the big picture? How do these policies actually help a company achieve its goals?
Right, well, that's where supporting organizational goals comes into play. Basically, Policies act like a bridge between what individual employees are doing and the big picture goals of the company.
Making sure everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Exactly. Like take data confidentiality, for example. Having a strong policy about keeping data confidential and actually enforcing it directly supports the company's reputation and its ability to do business securely. But if that policy is just ignored, then sensitive information could be leaked. And that can really hurt the company's efficiency, its profits, and the trust people have in it.
It's about making sure everyone's actions are aligned with the company's goals.
Yeah, and policies provide that framework. They're like the roadmap. Now, what happens when people disagree? When there are conflicts?
Conflict resolution, that's got to be a big one.
It is. Disagreements are going to happen in any workplace. That's just natural. But having well-defined policies and enforcing them consistently helps provide a structured way to handle those disputes, grievances, or even disciplinary actions in a way that's fair and efficient.
It takes the emotion out of it, helps keep things objective.
Exactly. If you don't have these guidelines, things can spiral out of control, conflicts can escalate, and you end up with all sorts of problems. Unresolved tension, people not being productive, people leaving the company because they're unhappy.
So it's not just about resolving conflicts, it's about preventing them from getting out of hand in the first place.
Right, and it really impacts the whole feel of the workplace, the culture.
Absolutely.
Policies are a major part of building a positive company culture. They often reflect what the company really values, things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is huge, if you have these beautiful policies written down and you don't actually enforce them, you completely undermine their credibility.
You're basically saying one thing and doing another.
Exactly. People see right through that. They see it as empty promises, and that leads to disengagement, lack of trust, the whole 9 yards. You've got to walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Actions speak louder than words.
100%.
Yeah.
And then we've got to think about how the company's perceived externally, its reputation.
Right, because what happens internally can definitely impact that.
No question. And policies play a big role in protecting that reputation. They help ensure that everyone in the company is behaving ethically and responsibly. Think about social media policies, for instance.
Oh yeah, that's a big one these days.
Huge. If those aren't enforced, you can have employees saying or doing things online that reflect really poorly on the company.
Potentially causing some serious damage.
Major damage. And it's not just social media. Unenforced policies in any area can make a company vulnerable to scandals and accusations of unethical behavior.
Because people might think they can get away with stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to sum up the general importance of workplace policies, if you're not consistently enforcing them, you're basically setting yourself up for failure.
Okay, so that's a pretty clear picture of why workplace policies in general are so important. But now let's shift gears and focus specifically on why these policies are absolutely essential for the IT department, particularly in the realm of cybersecurity.
Okay, so this is where things get even more critical because the stakes are higher, The potential impact of something going wrong in IT, especially with cybersecurity, can be way more significant.
We're talking about a whole different level of risk.
Absolutely. First of all, the IT department, they're like the guardians of all the company's sensitive data, customer info, intellectual property, financial records, employee details, all of it. And cybersecurity policies dictate how all this critical information is handled, how it's stored, how it's transmitted securely.
You're basically building a fortress around that data.
Exactly. But if those policies aren't followed, if they're not enforced, it's like leaving a gaping hole in your defenses. You might have employees using weak passwords, sharing confidential files over unsecured channels, accessing systems they shouldn't be, and all sorts of things that can lead to a data breach.
And we hear about those breaches all the time, right? It seems like every other week there's another company that's been hacked.
It's a constant threat. And the damage from those breaches, it's not just about the data that's lost. It's the financial hit, the damage to your reputation, the legal fallout. It can be devastating. And then it's not just about protecting data that's already there, it's also about preventing cyber attacks in the first place.
So it's a proactive approach, not just reactive.
Exactly. Cybersecurity policies lay out the preventative measures you need to take to protect against all sorts of nasty things. Phishing scams, ransomware attacks, malware, social engineering, all of it. They might require things like installing regular software updates, which are like packing holes in your defenses, or using multi-factor authentication, which adds an extra layer of security.
So you're making it much harder for the bad guys to get in.
Right, because if those policies aren't enforced, it's like leaving the door wide open. You're practically inviting attackers to come in and wreak havoc.
And then there's the whole issue of regulations, which seems to be getting more and more complex all the time.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. A lot of industries have to follow very specific cybersecurity regulations. Things like GDPR for protecting personal data, IPAPI for healthcare information, PCI DSS for payment card data, and so on.
So it's not just about what the company wants to do, it's about what the law requires.
Right. And the IT department is responsible for making sure they're following those regulations, which often means having specific policies in place and, again, enforcing them. If they don't, they could be hit with huge fines, legal action, and lose the trust of their customers.
Not a good look.
Not at all. And it's not just about external threats, right? Sometimes the danger comes from within the organization itself.
Insider threats, that's a whole other can of worms.
It is. But well-designed cybersecurity policies address those too. They cover things like how company tech resources can be used, what level of access different employees should have to data, and how to report suspicious activity.
So you're basically saying, here are the boundaries and you need to respect them.
Exactly. And if those policies aren't enforced, it becomes a lot easier for employees to misuse their access, whether intentionally or unintentionally. They might accidentally download malware, fall for a phishing scam, or even deliberately do something malicious.
And that can cause just as much damage as an external attack.
Absolutely. Enforcing those policies acts as a deterrent and helps catch those issues early on. And when you have a complex IT environment with lots of interconnected systems, consistency is key.
Makes sense. You don't want different parts of the system operating under different rules.
Right. Strong cybersecurity policies help standardize security practices across the board. So everyone is on the same page when it comes to managing and protecting IT assets. This might involve things like using specific encryption methods, setting password complexity requirements, or having a standardized way to respond to security incidents.
So you're creating a unified front against threats.
Exactly. And if you're not enforcing those standardized practices, you'll have different teams or even individuals doing their own thing, which creates gaps in your security.
Weak spots for attackers to exploit.
Right. So standardization is crucial for building a strong defense. Now let's talk about what happens when, despite all your best efforts, something does go wrong.
The worst case scenario, a breach.
Yeah, unfortunately it happens. But good cybersecurity policies usually include detailed plans for how to respond to those incidents. They outline the steps to take in case of a data breach or a cyber attack.
It's like a fire drill for cybersecurity.
Exactly. And the goal is to minimize the damage, get things back up and running quickly, and preserve any evidence you might need for investigations. But if people don't know those protocols or don't follow them when things get stressful,
And all that planning goes out the window.
pretty much, you could end up with longer downtime, bigger financial losses, and a much harder time recovering.
So it's about making sure everyone knows what to do in a crisis and that they're prepared to act quickly and effectively.
Right. And a big part of cybersecurity is making sure everyone in the organization understands the risks, not just the IT guys.
So it's about raising awareness and making sure everyone feels responsible for security.
Exactly. Cybersecurity policies often require regular training for all employees, teaching them about things like phishing scams, how to secure their devices, and how to protect their passwords. But if people aren't held accountable for that training, or if they just ignore it,
They become the weak link in the chain.
yeah, human error is still a huge factor in security breaches. And then you've got the whole rise of remote work, which has created a whole new set of challenges.
People working from home, on their own devices, connecting to the company network remotely, that's got to complicate things.
Oh, it definitely adds complexity. You got to make sure those remote workers are accessing everything securely, that they're not putting company data at risk on their personal devices, and that they're using collaboration tools safely. And that all comes back to policies.
Policies that need to be enforced no matter where people are working from.
Absolutely. If you're not enforcing those policies, remote workers can become easy targets for attacks. And all of this, it ultimately impacts how the company is seen by the outside world.
It affects your reputation.
Big time. Having strong cybersecurity policies that are actually enforced shows your customers, your partners, your investors that you take data security seriously. And that builds trust, which is essential for any business.
It shows you're responsible and reliable.
Right. But if people think you're not enforcing those policies, if they think their data isn't safe with you, well,
That can do serious damage to your reputation and your bottom line.
absolutely. And finally, we've got to talk about the financial side of things. cyber attacks can be incredibly costly for businesses.
We're talking about real money, not just hypothetical risks.
Oh yeah, the cost of cleaning up after a breach, dealing with legal issues, paying fines, lost business, it can be massive. And good cybersecurity policies, when they're enforced, help minimize those risks.
So it's an investment in protecting the company's future.
Exactly. But if those policies aren't enforced, you're much more vulnerable to those attacks, and the financial impact can be crippling.
So to recap, why is consistent enforcement so crucial in cybersecurity? Because the threats are constantly evolving, the consequences of even small mistakes can be huge, employees can easily develop bad habits online, companies without strong defenses become easy targets, and ignoring vulnerabilities can lead to disaster.
Exactly. And effective enforcement involves things like regular audits to make sure everyone's following the rules, disciplinary actions for those who break the rules, ongoing education to keep everyone up to speed, and making sure those policies themselves are kept up to date with the latest threats and technology.
So big picture, strong workplace policies, and particularly robust cybersecurity policies in IT, are absolutely essential for any organization that wants to function well, stay safe, and achieve its goals.
Couldn't agree more.
But all that effort is wasted if those policies aren't consistently and rigorously enforced. They're not just documents, they're the rules of the game. And everyone needs to play by those rules.
Right. And it's not just about the company as a whole. It's about you, the individual listener.
Thinking about your own workplace, your own role.
Exactly. Take a second and think about the policies in your own work environment. Are they actually being followed? Are they making a difference? Or are they just sitting there gathering dust? And what could happen if they're not enforced? That's something to really think about.
Food for thought. And this deep dive into the importance of workplace policies, with a particular focus on cybersecurity in the IT world, was made possible by the expertise of Ricardo Van Ramen, the CEO and founder of Information Systems Engineers, or ISEngineers.
A great resource.
They offer a whole range of services, from policy development and risk assessments to security audits and incident response.
So if you're looking to up your game in those areas, they're definitely worth checking out.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
And stay secure out there.